Today's lesson is the story of Joseph. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name's Candice.
And today we're going to talk about a story from the Bible, and it's all about Joseph, the story of Joseph. And I get kind of confused with Bible stories because we've got Joseph and we've got Jacob. Those are both names that start with J, so sometimes I get these names mixed up.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to go to Bible study, or at least to catechism, which means that we learned a lot about the Bible. So we learned about all the names, so we're quite used to all the J's. But this story, as you mentioned, has been retold many, many times. And this is a parable from the Bible. The Bible is full of stories with moral lesson. And this story about Jacob and his special coat is quite a popular one, and one of the ones that has been retold the most. It's the story of a man whose father really loved him, and he gets sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. So Joseph has the special ability to explain and interpret dreams. I know a lot of parables. If you read the Bible, you can find some more parables. I don't know, do you know any parables?
I do remember parables, say, from Greek mythology or Norse mythology. But, you know, the Bible's still there, and a lot of people read the Bible, and they know about the story of Joseph. So let's find out what this is all about. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and we'll come back to discuss it.
The story of Joseph. Out of Jacob of Canaan's 12 sons, Joseph was the most beloved. Jacob's special treatment of him had always made his brothers jealous, but when on his 17th birthday he received a beautiful coat unlike anything they'd ever seen, the brothers burned with envy.
大家好。第一部分我们看到形容词 beloved 指钟爱的或是挚爱的，像是 Laura's beloved cat has been missing for 3 days. Laura 钟爱的猫失踪3天了。也可以说 Sam buys his beloved wife flowers every week. Sam 每星期买花送给挚爱的老婆。
Okay, so again, it's a story from the Bible, a parable, as Candace says, and it's the story of Joseph. And out of Jacob of Canaan's 12 sons, Joseph was the most beloved. You could also say beloved, which means he was loved mostly by his parents. And of course, the main character here is Jacob of Canaan. And Jacob of Canaan had 12 sons. And of those 12 sons, out of those 12 sons, Joseph was the most beloved. He had other sons, and they were okay. You know, they were sweet kids and everything, but it was still Joseph that was the most special and most loved by his parents.
Canaan was an ancient country in the Middle East, and that's often talked about in the Bible. And as Roger said, Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. And because Jacob always treated Joseph in a very special way, he always gave him special gifts and always treated him very well, his brothers became really envious. So we say that they burned with envy. So because the emotion of envy is so strong and very negative, it's not a happy emotion. It's more like a fire that burns really strong and destroys everything in its path. So have you ever seen anyone burn with envy, or have you ever burned with envy?
Possibly, of course, if I had a crush on a certain girl and then she started going out with another guy. Well, yes, I burned with jealousy. Envy is really being angry about something that somebody else has. Jealousy tends to be between relationships, or it involves relationships, like you're jealous of how your father treats your brother, for example, which is the case here. Jacob of Canaan really liked Joseph, and the brothers were jealous as a result of that. But when on his 17th birthday he received a beautiful coat, unlike anything they'd ever seen, the brothers burned with envy. So, yes, it was bad enough that Dad liked Joseph so much. And now Dad even gave Joseph this beautiful coat. And it was a really special coat. The brothers didn't get anything like that. So they were not only jealous, but they burned with envy. They were just so envious. They really, really were angry because of that. And I don't blame them, actually.
Yeah, neither do I, Roger. I do think that parents have to treat their children a little bit more equally.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson. Let's continue to talk about this story, the story of Joseph. Let's move on now to the next part. We'll listen first.
When Joseph began talking about strange dreams he'd been having, in which his brothers all bowed before him as he protected them, the brothers decided they'd had enough. They devised a plan to trap Joseph in a pit and then sell him into slavery. Once the deed was done, they told their father that Joseph had been eaten by wild animals.
"第二部分我们看到单字 devise， 这个字是动词，表示策划、想出、设计或是发明。例如 The hunter devised a trap to catch rabbits. 这名猎人策划了一个抓兔子的陷阱。或是 Scientists have devised a new method to recycle plastic. 科学家已经想出一个新方式来回收塑胶。接着我们看到名词 deed， 指做的事情、行为或是事迹。举例来说 He did a good deed by helping the old lady cross the street. 他帮助那位老太太过马路，做了一件善行。也可以说 My good deed today was helping a woman carry her heavy bags. 我今天做的好事就是帮一个妇人提沉重的袋子。
Okay, now remember, to sum up here, Jacob of Canaan had 12 sons, and his favorite son was Joseph. And, of course, the brothers were jealous, and then Joseph made them even more envious when he got this special coat from his father. It says here, when Joseph began talking about strange dreams he'd been having, in which his brothers all bowed before him as he protected them, the brothers decided they'd had enough. So Joseph was causing them all sorts of problems. Joseph began talking about these dreams, and they were strange dreams, and in those dreams, in which his brothers all bowed before him. And that's kind of the last straw there, okay? The brothers are jealous to begin with. Now he's having dreams of the brothers bowing down before him. I think the brothers would be very angry about that.
Yeah, I think after Joseph's father gifted him his beautiful coat, the brothers' jealousy and resentment were already running high. So on top of that, Joseph's dream about his brothers bowing to him made them hate him even more. And I think that's what pushed them to take action. As you say, it was the last straw, or the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. So they decided that they'd had enough. They didn't want him around anymore.
That's right. You can say that sometimes when you're disgusted. I've had enough of this situation. I'm going to do something about this, and complained to the teacher. So here, of course, the brothers decided that they'd had enough. They're going to do something about this, and they devised a plan to trap Joseph in a pit and then sell him into slavery. So, of course, they came up with a plan, or they devised a plan. So here, to devise means to think up and organize some kind of idea, or as in this case, some kind of plan.
Right, so they discussed it, and then they carefully put together this plan to firstly trap him in a pit, and then one of the brothers said, okay, let's sell Joseph into slavery because we can make some money, but we don't have to kill him. What they really wanted was they wanted Joseph to be gone. But of course, none of them wanted to murder him, wanted to kill him.
Right, so they dug a hole in the ground and maybe covered it with leaves or something. And so Joseph fell into that pit. A pit, of course, is a hole in the ground. And then they caught him, and then they were going to sell sell him into slavery. Slavery, of course, is a system of forced labor. You own people and you make them work for you. Of course, slavery was very common in the United States many years ago, but it was also very common in Brazil and other countries like that. But in this particular case, yes, the brother was sold into slavery. Here, you can buy him and he can be your slave.
Slavery was not only common in the United States and South America, but it was also, at the time the story was written in the Bible, it was very common in Egypt and the Middle East and Canaan. And so the brothers were able to get rid of Joseph and make some money, and he had to work for no pay. I mean, that happens today as well, where people have to work for no pay, but it's not as obvious and as common as it was back then.
Indeed. So what we have happening here is Joseph was sold into slavery, but of course they need to explain to the dad what happened to Joseph. So once the deed was done, they told their father that Joseph had been eaten by wild animals. So a deed, of course, is something that you do. It could be a good deed or a bad deed. Of course, you're a great person if you do good deeds for people. You hold the door open for elderly people when they enter a store or something like that. That would be a good deed. Or you donate blood, or you volunteer at a hospital or something like that. So those are all good deeds. But this was an action that they did. They caught him and sold him into slavery. So once that act was done, once that deed was done, they had to tell their father something. So father was going, hey, what happened to Joseph? You know, he's my favorite son. You know, where'd he go? I'm worried about him. Oh, Dad, sorry to tell you this, but he was eaten by wild animals. He was attacked by wild rabbits and squirrels.
Okay, well, I think the animals and the predators were a little bit larger than rabbits and squirrels, but I think they had to think quickly because they had to find any excuse to be able to explain why Joseph wasn't around anymore, because their father probably wouldn't believe that he'd just gone off on his own. And of course, we also sometimes say do a deed. So when we say once the deed was done, we're not really talking about good deeds. Usually we're talking about something that might be evil or wrong. And in this case, selling your brother into slavery is definitely a bad deed, not a good deed.
Yeah, I think Macbeth said something like that when he killed King Duncan. I have done the deed. I have killed the king. But in this particular case, though, the deed was trapping Joseph in a pit and selling him into slavery. And then they just told dear old dad, oh, he got eaten by a crazed desert lion or something like that. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third part.
The slave merchants brought Joseph from Canaan to Egypt and sold him to the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. But it wasn't long before Joseph was thrown in jail for a perceived slight against the captain's wife. There, some of the prisoners told him they'd also had strange dreams, and they asked him what they might mean. Joseph accurately foretold the prisoners' fates, and he soon became known for interpreting dreams. Those he said would be freed were freed, and those he said would die were killed.
第三部分我们看到单字 perceived， 这个字是形容词，表示感受到的或是察觉到的。例如 Joe felt upset at a perceived insult after someone didn't shake his hand. Joe 因为有人不跟他握手而感受到被侮辱，觉得有点难过。也可以说 Small dogs often respond aggressively to any perceived threat. 小型犬通常会对任何察觉到的威胁做出激烈反应。另外补充这个字的动词 perceive, P-E-R-C-E-I-V-E, perceive, 指察觉或是意识到。像是 Vincent could perceive the slight difference between the two shades of purple. Vincent 能察觉这两种紫色极细微的差异。或是 None of us perceived the problems that the new policies would bring. 我们没有任何一人意识到这些新政策可能带来的问题。接着我们看到动词 foretell， 指预言、预知或是预测。举例来说 The prophet foretold that the world is about to have a crisis. 那位先知预言世界即将有一场危机。也可以说 I can't foretell how the weather will be tomorrow. 我无法预测明天的天气将会如何。最后我们看到动词 interpret 表示诠释、解释或是说明。例如 It looks like you and I have interpreted the story in two very different ways. 看来我和你对这个故事的诠释是两种非常不同的方式。或是 I'm not sure how to interpret his strange actions. 我不确定该如何解释他的怪异行径。另外补充这个字的名词 interpretation. I-N-T-E-R-P-R-E-T-A-T-I-O-N interpretation 指诠释或是解释。像是 Mary is famous for her modern interpretations of traditional Spanish architecture. Mary 以对传统西班牙建筑做出现代诠释而闻名。也可以说 One interpretation of this book is that it was meant to scare children into behaving well. 这本书的一种解释是为了吓唬孩子，让他们表现得好。
Okay, so remember the brothers were selling Joseph into slavery. So we've got these merchants now. These are people who deal with slaves. They probably buy them at a cheap price and then sell them for a profit to somebody else. So the slave merchants brought Joseph from Canaan to Egypt and sold him to the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. But it wasn't long before Joseph was thrown in jail for a perceived slight against the captain's wife. So, of course, Canaan is kind of near where Palestine and Israel are now. And so they crossed the Sinai Peninsula there into Egypt and sold him to the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. Of course, the leader of the Egyptians is called a pharaoh. But it wasn't long before Joseph was thrown in jail. So it wasn't long before something happened just means this happened pretty soon. He was sold to the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. But pretty soon after that, he got in trouble.
Right. And as you mentioned, slavery was quite common at that time. And being a slave to the captain for the Pharaoh's guard would probably have been quite a good position as far as a position as a slave goes, because there would probably be a lot less physical labor. So maybe they didn't have to carry bricks or do some hard work. However, it wasn't long before Joseph was thrown in jail. So it wasn't long before means that just a short time had passed, and the phrase almost means that it would be expected that he would get into some kind of trouble. It wasn't long before he got into trouble, right? So we kind of expect him to get into trouble, and this time the trouble was a perceived slight against the captain's wife. Now, perceived means that it might not be real, but it's what something looks like. We perceive it to be a certain way. So the slight is usually when something bad happens, when you say something bad or you do something that someone doesn't like, you insult them, you maybe say, oh, you look really ugly in that dress. That's a slight or an insult. And so it might have been unintentional. Maybe he didn't mean anything bad by it, but his actions or words may have been misunderstood.
Exactly. A slight can also be when you ignore someone who should have respect. So, of course, the captain's wife is probably somebody who deserved respect, and maybe Joseph did not show her due respect, or maybe he whistled at her or something. But in any case, he did something against the captain's wife that they didn't like, but it was only perceived as such. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, but he got thrown in jail anyway, and there some of the prisoners told him they'd also had strange dreams, and they asked him what they might mean. So remember, Joseph was telling his brothers that he had these dreams that the brothers would bow down before him, and now the prisoners in this jail in Egypt told Joseph that, hey, we've had these strange dreams, and we want you to tell us what they mean.
Right, and Joseph immediately knew what these dreams meant. And it soon came to pass that everybody knew that Joseph had a special talent for understanding the meaning of dreams. And so he listened to the prisoners' dreams, and based on their dreams, he was able to predict, see the future, if you will, whether the prisoners would be freed or killed. So when the prisoners told him about their dreams, he was able to say, okay, after a certain period of time, you're going to be freed. And to others, he would say, oh, I'm sorry, but your dream means that you are going to be killed.
Right, so here it says he foretold these things. And if you can foretell something, that means you can predict the future. And so he foretold their fate. He knew what was going to happen to them. And so he became known for interpreting dreams. And if you interpret something, that means you explain something or you figure out what something means. We often talk about somebody who translates from one language to another as an interpreter. It's not a translator. A translator will do it in the written form. An interpreter will do it in the spoken form. But in this particular case, he can interpret dreams. If you tell Joseph what you dreamed about, he can tell you what it means. Well, the fact that you dreamt about your dead grandfather means that blah, 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 this is going to happen to you in the future. So he's interpreting the dreams.
Yes, and dreams are really hard to understand. As we all know, when we have a dream, sometimes it's very confusing and there are lots of elements, but there are people who have a unique ability to understand these dreams, and Joseph was one of them.
So he's pretty good at interpreting dreams, and he also knows how to foretell the future. Hey, this is one magic kid here. Maybe the Pharaoh will figure that out and use him for his own purposes. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第3部分第一句有写到 It wasn't long before Joseph was thrown in jail for a perceived slight against the captain's wife. 没多久，约瑟就因为护卫长的妻子觉得受到轻慢而被关进监牢。那这边要介绍一个句型是 It wasn't long before 主词加动词，可以表达不久后就发生什么什么，不久后就怎么样，用来表达说某件事情它发生后不久，另一件事情就接着发生了。举例来说 Mark and Whitney had good first impressions of each other, and it wasn't long before they started dating.Mark 和 Whitney 对彼此的第一印象很好，不久后他们就开始交往了。那另外，如果我们是要指未来情况，那你可以用到的句型是 It won't be long before 主词加动词，像是 Let's hope it won't be long before everything returns to normal. 希望不久之后一切就恢复正常了。好，我们接着看到句子里面这个 perceived slight， 它是表达感受到被另一个人轻慢对待。这边的 perceived 是当形容词来描述感受到的、察觉到的，那它是来自动词 perceive。我们来学它的字首字根。好，当你看到 cap 或者是 ceive 或者是 cept 这一类字根，它表示拿取、掌握或是接受的意思。那我们看到在 perceive 这个字当中，它的字首 per 表示完全贯穿，那么字根 ceive 表示接受。当我们完全接受、全心全意接受某事物，你才能够好好的理解它。那从这边也许可以联想到 perceive 这个动词，它有理解、察觉或是感知的意思。我们顺便补充几个相同字根的单字。第一个是 conceive， 它的字首 con 带有强调的语义，也有那种一起啊、共同的意思。那么 sieve 表示取得。好，那共同取得、一起取得要怎么联想呢？其实 conceive 这个动词可以指怀胎、怀孕。同学们可以用两个人共同迎接新生命的方式去联想 conceive， 它有怀胎受孕的意思。那除此之外，我们中文不是也会说孕育新的想法、孕育出新的点子吗？所以 conceive 它还可以表达构想、想出，像是想出某个计划、主义等等。 第二个补充的是 deceive， 它的字首第一有分离或否定的意思，那么字根 sieve 表示取得。同学们可以试着想，以不好的方式、不当的方式取得，那就有欺骗、欺诈的意思。那么 deceive 这个动词就表示欺骗、蒙蔽。第三个补充的是 receive， 它的字首 re 有往回的意思，字根 sieve 表示拿取，那从字面意思来看，那就是取回嘛，所以 receive 它有接收、收到的意思。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Beloved. Timothy's beloved grandmother passed away last year. Devise. The scientists devised a way to turn seawater into drinking water. Slavery. Harriet Tubman spent more than a decade helping people escape from slavery. Deed. I strongly believe that our deeds define us, not our words. Slight. Charlene chose to ignore the slight and continued speaking with confidence. Interpret. In the last section of the paper, the researchers interpret the results of the study.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Candice.
See you next time.